for now, we're going to move to Joseph Eagan, former president of Polychain, co-founder of Anagram, to help us. Joseph's a friend of a friend and now a friend who I saw a quote that I thought was really insightful about the power of blockchain. It allows for capitalism without the corporation, communism without the state. And so I wanted to pass it off to Joseph while I take everyone off of pinned mode. Welcome, Joseph.
Thanks, Elliot. Thanks so much for having me. And thanks for being the first person to ever say that I said something insightful. I truly appreciate that. There's really a lot of different ways to, I think, talk about crypto, digital assets, the digital asset ecosystem. And I think a lot of times when people do talk about crypto today, they're probably talking about FTX or Sam Bankman-Fried, but maybe before that even, they were mostly talking about an underlying technology, volatility in asset prices, its energy use, some of the ways that maybe it would disrupt the US dollar. I don't know, there's a whole different array of ways that you can really think about these crypto economic systems. But at its core, I think that cryptocurrencies and their underlying blockchain technologies really are, for the first time in maybe 50 years, rebuilding an entirely new technological stack. And that's very interesting. And I think we can talk a little bit about that going forward over the next few minutes. But I do think that that new technological stack actually has other, I think, sometimes more interesting ramifications for us socioeconomically. So to me, that is really the core of what I wanted to talk about here today, and also hear everyone's feedback on this idea as I continue to refine it and think further about it. But to me, crypto at its core will empower individuals globally, communities, both locally and globally, whether it's your next door neighbor or someone across the continent or world from you. And I also believe it will lift impoverished people and impoverished communities economically upwards as we decentralize and democratize financial systems for all. And so this, when I was thinking about this, reminded me of something I think I probably heard in high school, but it was a quote from Churchill, I believe. I'll probably get this wrong a little bit, but it was something like, democracy is the worst form of government, except for all of the others that have, or all the others that have been tried. I think it was something like that. And that's much the same way that I feel about capitalism today. I'm not really here to bastardize either capitalism or communism, but really to think positively about where there are attributes in both of these systems and where I think we can push the world going forward, and how this underlying, I think, very interesting technology might be one of the core features that allows us to push forward into this new, I guess, socio-political economic system, which for the time being I've called communal freedom. And so these crypto economic systems and the blockchains they run on, I just mentioned, and as Elliot said before, really communal freedom is a concept that I drew from this idea that is communism without the state and capitalism without the corporation. And what's interesting about that concept to me is that each of these two entities, the state on the one hand, the corporation on the other hand, are rent seekers on top of transactions, right? A corporation charges you for a thing, whether that's the right price probably depends upon how monopolistic it is. Similarly, in a communistic enterprise, you have a state that acts as the rent seeker on top of really all of the transactions across the state. And so when we think about then how we can start to unwind some of that rent-seeking ability and try and find a more novel path forward, the first thing to really look at is this, I think, underlying technology. So if we just stick here for 1 second, the blockchain technology is really based on a series of innovations across cryptography, game theory, math, computer science, economics, economic theory. It's an entirely new paradigm. And earlier I said it was really the first time we had created a new tech stack. Even fintech today, as we think about it, is really like a shiny UI on top of a pre-existing financial ecosystem. So if you think about something like Robinhood, which really brought equity trading to the masses, this is really a fancy mobile app that sits atop pre-existing financial technology. Within crypto, and digital assets and related blockchain technologies, we are, I think, for the first time seeing this core tech stack be migrated onto a new ecosystem, and really, I think, moving away from our legacy financial ecosystem. And so this in and of itself, I'm happy to answer more questions ongoing, once I'm through with all of this, but really that whole technology is a book, many books have been written about this, and I think it's really interesting, but it's really the socioeconomic power that I think could sit atop of this technological innovation, which is where I'm most interested in focusing my time as we get more and more people into this crypto economic system. And one of the core, I think, features of this, and maybe one of the core features to think about and talk about today, is how these economic returns, both within communism, capitalism, and communal freedom, are distributed, and how new technologies could allow returns to be distributed across a community more, I would say, equitably or fairly, based on a concept as users of systems become owners of systems. And so, before we get into that, quickly, let's talk about what I call corporate tension, or really the existence of the corporation itself. So the corporation today, I think, has done an enormous amount of power or good even within the capitalistic society in terms of distribution of financial capital, right? So these corporations are able to aggregate capital, dispense it, acquire human capital, and build some amazing technologies, much like the Zoom technology that we're using here to all chat with. But at the same time, it creates a corporate tension that exists between the equity holders on the one hand and then the users on the other hand. So the example I talk about a lot when thinking about this is Uber. Right, so if you think about the user base of Uber, there's a bunch of drivers, there's a bunch of riders. Most of these individuals, I would suggest, are probably not equity holders of Uber. At the same time, we have the equity holders of Uber who are probably hedge funds and mutual funds who probably are not using Uber, right? These equity holders, the executives of Uber and these hedge funds, have a keen interest on raising the 20% rent on top of every transaction from 20% to 21% or 25% or whatever the number might be. Whereas me, the rider in Uber, would prefer to see that rent actually go down to something approaching zero, right? I want to see the system persist, but I also want my cost of use to go directly to the driver of that car, and also reduce that rent that sits atop of that transaction. And so on the one hand, the equity holders want the stock price to go up, and on the other hand, the users want a better user experience. And so if we fast forward to crypto, I want to use a similar example to, I think, discuss how I think we can find a better path forward by eliminating this corporate tension that exists between the users and the owners of these systems. Really, I think the first great protocol within the DeFi ecosystem of crypto was Compound. Compound is a company that was started in 2018. The firm that I previously worked at, Polychain, where I was the president for a number of years, led the seed round in Compound. And we did this investment into a company itself. So we invested through a safe into a company. They subsequently created a lending pool in a smart contract on top of Ethereum. I could lend assets into that protocol, or I could borrow assets out of that protocol. They, over the course of about a year and a half, 2 years, found, I think, pretty good product market fit. They had something like $150 million locked into this lending pool. If you think about that, a corollary in fintech, I think it was Lending Club had acquired about $500 million of total value locked in its system in the first 5 years. So they had really done a quite impressive job, I think, of getting people to come and use their protocol. What happened then was, once they had found this product market fit, they took the cap table, they split it up 50-50. So the equity holders were 50% of it, and the future users were 50% of it. And they distributed, instead of equity, tokens to all of the equity holders. So if we owned 10%, we now held 5%, of the tokens. And so a lot of people ask us, why would you take 50% dilution to give up to some future user of this protocol that we don't even know if it's going to come and use this system? we said, well, let's just wait and see what happened. It was actually our investors who I think were fairly frustrated at first, given that we had just given up 50% of our investment. Subsequent to that, Compound began distributing their token to people who came to use the protocol. That token then was utilized in the governance system to vote on the future path forward for this protocol. As that happened, more and more users came to use the protocol. As they used it more and more, became larger and larger holders in this ecosystem. As I became a bigger and bigger user of this system, I became a bigger and bigger holder of that asset, and therefore a bigger and bigger voter in that future of the ecosystem. So here we had an overlap in the Venn diagram, or the concentric circles of the users and the owners, in air quotes, of the system, whereby now the people who were using it were actually the people who were determining the path forward from it, and were able to vote on their own behalf for what they felt was the interesting path forward. So now you had an ecosystem that, instead of charging itself more and more, all decided that fees should be something approaching zero. And so you had this better opportunity for governance, better opportunity for consensus, and better opportunity for distribution of economic returns. And really, at the end of the day, what Compound was doing was incentivizing use. Right? What they wanted was more and more people to come and use the system, and to build a community around how the system was built, governed, and pushed forward. Subsequent to Compound, many hundreds, even DeFi protocols, and now even other protocols beyond DeFi have emerged and used this similar model. Now, let me be clear that I don't think this is a perfect model at all. I think there's a whole array of issues within governance in the crypto ecosystems. I think there's some very interesting fixes to those. But this was an amazing initial attempt to decentralize a corporation in a way that we had never really seen before. And I think really showed how, if we push users to become owners, they become wildly interested in the success of that protocol. Within 6 months, Compound's TVL went from, I think it was 150 million to about $2 billion of value locked into that protocol. Over time, DeFi ballooned pretty massively to over $100 billion of assets locked in these financial systems. That has compressed over the recent months, but I think that's just sort of a beginning, a tip of the iceberg of where we go as we begin to decentralize more and more of these financial ecosystems. So now we have this system of decentralized corporations, excuse me, where the users become the owners. Similarly, though, we have seen the emergence of another type of decentralized system. We'll call this a DAO. I think many people have seen DAOs, heard of DAOs, read about them in the news. There's really many different types of DAOs that we can talk about. We could even call Compound one form of a DAO. Another form of a DAO is a community of people that come together aligned on similar interests. One interesting example that I like to point to here is Constitution DAO. Not only is it an irony of this talk that a community of people is trying to buy the Constitution of our capitalist country here in the United States, but also a group of people decided to come together and effectively fractionalize the ownership of an item. Even though they didn't win the Constitution, they were able to come in second place, a close second, I would say, in the bidding for this constitutional document. And in so doing, if they had won, this group of people would have been able to fractionalize the ownership effectively of this good, this good of significant value. So now this community can determine themselves how they would like to monetize this and future goods that they can buy together. So now you can have communal ownership of assets, you can have communal ownership of corporations, you can have decentralized communal ownership of all of these different types of assets. And so now you start to see the beginnings of not only the governorship of these decentralized corporations, you start to see the decentralization of the returns of these once centralized entities. And all of these behaviors lead us to, I think, a more communal freedom where users become owners and communities become the governors of these former institutions, now decentralized institutions or DAOs. So maybe just to close out my thinking on this as it relates to Uber, because I do believe a system like Uber is actually a great example to talk about as one of the future entities that might be decentralized and how this might come to more interesting, I think, paths forward for all of us socioeconomically. To date, we have the corporation that I ping on my phone it sends me a driver. I pay the corporation, it takes out 20% and then pays the driver probably a month later for that ride. In the future, I think what will happen is we will have a decentralized system. Maybe it's Ethereum, Solana, on top of which we build some form of decentralized app. I ping that decentralized system. It sends a driver, probably a driverless car, to me. I ride in that car. I pay that car 1 Uber coin or 1 micro ETH or whatever it might be per mile. I can actually stream that payment to that driverless car real time, so that as I'm riding longer and longer, that car is actually getting paid second by second as it progresses further and further down the line. And in addition to that, that car will likely be owned by 100 different people. And that group of people will all have some form of or version of rights over how that car is used. Today, it might be for Uber, tomorrow it might be for Lyft, and then on the third day, maybe it's for me, and on the fourth day for you. And so now we as a community have a chance to have more fractionalized ownership across these communities, have more decision-making power over how these things are used and operated. And lastly, as we become owners of these items, as opposed to renters of these items, we have more of the economic output from that car. We each own 1/100th of the cost or the fee that that driverless car in this example makes for participating in that. I could go really down the rabbit hole in terms of talking about how I think Uber and all these other corporations will end up interoperating with each other, because that's another aspect that we haven't gotten into here today, which is how the open source nature of this code allows us all now to build in fun games and experiences into these open source technologies that we will all use communally and together. But maybe that is probably for another day. Happy to pause there, take some questions, or Elliot, if you have any other topics you want me to cover, happy to go into those as well.
Yeah, well, we have our panel to get into. I know we started a few minutes late, so I'd love to hear how you envision this transition happening. Do you think it's that, for example, in the Uber example, that an Uber competitor that is decentralized and collectively owned is going to emerge? Do you think that these new kind of exit to community models are going to, in a positive way, infect existing corporations, and they will transition in order to stay competitive? What do you see this change? What form do you see it taking?
Yeah, I think that's the great unknown, and I don't care to pontificate on the end of the existence of things that are beneficial to our society today. At the same time, I've asked the question many times to many people: which is the incumbent company that you're aware of that has persisted as new technology comes into the fray? And there's Amazon disrupted Barnes and Noble, right? There's a million examples of the disruption that takes place as a new, I guess, technology and also company that embodies that technology comes to bear on the market. So my sense is more that it will be something new that is created. And by the way, I don't think we're at the point where, if someone came to me and said, hey, we want to create a decentralized version of Uber, I'm not sure we're totally there in the ability to do that. I think we're missing a bunch of stuff like decentralized GPS, better decentralized file storage, better throughput on the blockchain. There's a whole array of issues that we need to tackle, but I do think that there will come a time when more and more of these technologies will become decentralized, whether we realize it or not. Much in the same way, when you click on Uber today, there's probably 10,000 different little micro technological transactions that are happening behind the scenes that you're totally unaware of. Similarly, you will click on, DAP Uber later, and you won't necessarily know that all of these other microtransactions across middleware and HTTP, SSL, et cetera, are all happening behind the scenes.
Wonderful.